Hello, and welcome to this Crane special event. Thank you for joining us today. We're so glad that you're here. My name is Dr. Rebecca Dorr, and I'm the Director of Research here at the Crane Center for Early Childhood Research and Policy. Today's event will highlight findings from the federally funded project titled Family and Program Strengths, examining profiles to support social emotional well-being among children in early Head Start programs. Our speakers today will be monitoring our chat box and adding housekeeping items there. I'm very pleased to introduce our team of speakers today, Dr. Sarah Lang, Dr. Susan Yoon, Dr. Erin Tebben, and Yuzheng Chang. Dr. Sarah Lang is an associate professor in human development and family science and a Crane Center faculty affiliate. Her work centers on improving the quality of early care and education by strengthening the systems, relationships, and professional learning environments that shape children's earliest experiences. Drawing on her background as both a practitioner and a researcher, Dr. Lang examines family provider partnerships, early childhood educator well-being, and professional development approaches that support equitable, high-quality practice across diverse contexts. Dr. Lang directs the Virtual Lab School, a large-scale research and competency-based professional development system funded by the Department of Defense and the Department of Agriculture and serving the early care and education workforce. Dr. Susan Yoon, an associate professor in the College of Social Work at The Ohio State University and a Crane Center faculty affiliate. Her scholarship focuses on how children and families navigate adversity and on identifying pathways that foster resilience, safety, and healthy development in the context of child maltreatment, family violence, and substance use. Informed by her prior experience as a child protective services worker, Dr. Yoon investigates the ways individual, familial, and community level factors, such as caregiving relationships, father involvement, and neighborhood environments, interact over time to shape developmental outcomes. She leads the Thrive Research Lab, where she directs a program of federally funded research focused on resilience, father involvement, and multi-level protective factors for children and families impacted by adversity. Dr. Erin Tebben is the Associate Director of Research and Program Evaluation at the Virtual Lab School here at The Ohio State University. Dr. Tebben's research centers around the adults who care for and educate young children, with a focus on developing and evaluating interventions that enhance adults' capacity to engage in responsive caregiving and create developmentally supportive experiences. Finally, Yuzheng Chang is a PhD candidate in the College of Social Work at The Ohio State University. Ms. Chang is a researcher in the Thrive Lab focused on resilience in the context of child maltreatment. Her work examines multi-level protective and promotive factors shaping developmental pathways for children exposed to adversity. Today, our speakers will share findings from their project, highlighting family and program strengths within early Head Start and offering practical insights for professionals working in both home-based and center-based settings. And with all that, I will turn it over to you, Dr. Lang.
Thank you so much, Dr. Dorr. I just want to welcome everyone here. We are so grateful and honored that you've taken the next hour to be with us as we're going to share some of our hot off the presses research. Just to kind of orient you to what the next hour will be like, we're going to start by briefly sharing a little bit about the importance of early Head Start and what it provides to children and families. We'll also briefly explain the data that we examined in our research. And then our team of presenters will each take turns sharing key findings from our work, highlighting practical takeaways as we do so. And finally, we're going to save some time at the end for answering questions, so please feel free to use that Q&A as we go throughout our session, and we'll return to those questions at the end. I also want to thank Dr. Dorr for that beautiful introduction of our presenters today. I also want to acknowledge that our research is really the result of a collaborative effort. So everyone that you see pictured on this slide is part of our research team. They're co-authors on the work that we share with you today, and they really contributed to design, analysis, and interpretation of our work. So our thanks to Dr. Min-Jung Kim, Dr. Jun Wang, Philomena Oyeyoboa, Yunzi Yu, and Abby Bush. Okay, so before we dive in, throughout today's session, our team will be using a quick live polling app called Slido to hear from you and help to make this webinar a bit more engaging, because I know sometimes it can feel a lot like information's coming at you and maybe you don't have a time to contribute. So we're going to use this Slido to help make it a little bit more interactive. You can join the Slido now by scanning this QR code or by going to slido.com in a browser window. and you can use this join code 3419723 to join. This code, that join code and the QR code will display every time we use a Slido, so don't worry that you need to remember it. The presentation will automatically remind you. So let's try our first one. I see that we have almost 70 folks live with us right now. Amazing. We'd love to know a little bit more about who all is with us on this uh, uh, live call today. So I'm already seeing people. Thank you for participating. So you can select all that apply to you. We made this a multi-select. So if this is many things about you, feel free to select all that apply. I'm already seeing that we have a number of folks who work within Head Start or Early Head Start live with us. Wonderful. We were hoping that we would have a lot of practitioners on the call. I also see that a lot of folks really, over 65% are saying they have a familiarity with the mission of Early Head Start. Great. I'll go quickly through our brief intro then. I just want to highlight for any researchers, I see about maybe 12% of folks on the call are part of our researchers in care and education. Wonderful. I just want to highlight for that audience, we're going to be focusing more on our findings and interpretation, so kind of practical takeaways from that today. But if you have questions about our analysis or the variables we use, feel free to reach out to our team. Okay, thanks everybody for participating. This is really exciting. We'll do some more of these later. So I saw that a decent amount of folks are familiar with the mission and purpose of Head Start. For anyone on this webinar who's still building some understanding in this space, I just want to share that Early Head Start is a U.S. federally funded program that works with the grantees from across states and territories to provide comprehensive services for low-income pregnant women and low-income families with infants and toddlers, so that 0 to 36-month range. And they're really focused on promoting children's development, responsive caregiving, supporting family engagement, and connecting families to community resources to help them thrive. In each year, these programs support nearly 250,000 children and their families nationwide. So I saw, again, lots of people familiar with Head Start and its sort of mission, but I'll say that it provides comprehensive support through a two-generational model that really serves both young children and their caregivers. And that whole family orientation integrates things like parenting support, individualized child development services, and health and service coordination to strengthen family stability and enhance families' capacity. And I know for the folks that are working in Head Start, this is probably directly connecting to that work that you're doing every day. Early Head Start programs are focused on ensuring that all families get what they need to be successful and support children's healthy development, really tailoring services to diverse family contexts, while expanding access to high-quality early development opportunities for communities that are affected by economic hardship. We know that Early Head Start is grounded in research and a continuous improvement framework, and it has already demonstrated benefits for a multitude of things like enhancing the quality of parent-child interactions or supporting children's early language and cognitive development, as well as their social-emotional development. And we know that these benefits often extend beyond early childhood and contribute to long-term readiness for children in school and in life. When taken together, the purpose and the power of Early Head Start lies not only in the direct support that it provides to those very young children, those infants and toddlers, but also in its ability to uplift families, to build and enhance their resilience, and promote positive developmental trajectories for low-income families through work that's really deeply rooted in a relationship-centered framework or approach. So we know Early Head Start is important for supporting many children and families in the US, and I just want to quickly highlight that Early Head Start does this through different delivery models. Okay, so to provide flexible, accessible, and culturally responsive support to different families. So some of you who are more familiar with Early Head Start might know that there's center-based services, there's home visiting services, and also sometimes family childcare. Today, we're going to really focus on that home visiting and center-based programming. So for anyone who's less familiar with what home visiting services are, these are typically weekly visits conducted in a family's home where a professional meets simultaneously with that parent or caregiver and the child to emphasize relationship building, responsive and developmentally appropriate caregiving, as well as ensuring families are aware and connected to the services that are available to them. In contrast, center-based programs are more about like childcare related. They provide regular childcare to small groups. They're staffed by early childhood teachers. They offer developmentally appropriate learning experiences for very young children. Across all the models, Early Head Start's mission is to provide this holistic, strengths-based approach that really integrates strong family engagement, developmental screenings, health coordination, and again, community connection to support access to early care and support. In the work that we'll present today, we'll be examining families and children in both home visiting as well as center-based delivery models, as these are the two most widely used delivery models in Early Head Start. I'm now going to pass the microphone over to Susan, who's going to tell you a little bit about our theoretical frameworks for this work.
Thank you, Sarah. All right, so next we would like to share a little bit about several theoretical frameworks that guided our work, which included resilience theory, strengths-based approaches, and heterogeneity. So the theoretical foundation guiding our work included, again, resilience theory, strengths-based approaches, and also recognizing the heterogeneity among families and programs. So starting with resilience theory. So resilience theory reminds us that families are not only defined by the challenges that they face, but really emphasizes the capacity of individuals, families, programs, and systems. In other words, even in the presence of adversity, families and programs and systems often draw on protective factors and strengths, such as supportive relationships, and for families, things like stable routines to adopt and support children's development. Therefore, when applied to the context of early Head Start, resilience theory informs practices aimed at strengthening caregiver-child interactions, strengthening families, fostering emotional security, and also equipping families with tools to navigate challenges very successfully. Second, the strengths-based approaches. We, as a team, take a strengths-based approach. So rather than focusing on risks or deficits of individuals, families, or programs, this perspective really emphasizes the existing assets, resources, and capabilities within families and programs and systems. So more specifically, rather than centering on problems or limitations, these strengths-based approaches really recognize that families bring cultural, relational, experiential, and practical strengths that can be leveraged to support children's development. Therefore, strengths-based practice aims to empower caregivers, promote agency, and also validate the skills and insights that families and staff members already possess. So this lens is embedded throughout early Head Start through relational goal setting, collaborative decision making, as well as culturally affirming engagement strategies. And finally, it is really important to recognize heterogeneity across families as well as early Head Start programs. So, not all families experience or express strengths in the same way, and not all families have the same needs or have the same access to resources. And for example, families may demonstrate strengths through effective routines at home or culturally sensitive and culturally important and meaningful practices supporting children's social emotional development, but also may fluctuate in their engagement with available services. Similarly, early Head Start programs may exhibit strengths through high quality staff relationships and strong leadership, but may lack professional development opportunities or systems. So, together, these three perspectives shape how we think about family and program strengths and how they may support infant and toddler social emotional development in the context of early Head Start. All right. Once again, we're really curious to hear from you all in the room today. As we think about these strengths-based approaches that I just talked about, we would love to hear from you all as to how you have used such strengths-based approaches in your work with families, or through early childhood education programs, or through early Head Start programs. So once again, please use Slido and share your experiences with us. Wonderful. I'm already seeing your responses coming through. So thank you so much for your participation. So I'm seeing things like goal setting, and meeting families where they are. I think that's really important. Um, Again, I think a lot of you are talking about or sharing your experience of using goal setting with parents as a really important strengths-based strategy slash approach. Um, Things like building capacity, building parents' confidence, connecting with valuable resources. Wonderful. This is so wonderful to see that a lot of you are already implementing strengths-based approaches in your work. Thanks again for sharing. So moving on to the next section, which is data and methods. So we will very briefly talk about data and methods. I should mention that we conducted a secondary data analysis for this project, meaning instead of collecting our own data, we used existing data sets for our project. So more specifically, we used a data set that's named Baby Faces. It is Early Head Start Family and Child Experiences Survey in terms of its full name, but we call it Baby Faces. So we used Baby Faces 22 data for our analysis. And this is a great data set and great data source because it is a very large and nationally representative study that examined the experiences of families and programs enrolled in, or families enrolled in Early Head Start. And I think that one of the very good things about this data set and one strength about this data set is that it does include multiple sources of information, including surveys from families and surveys collected and data collected from teachers or home visitors in the EHS context, as well as observational assessments of caregiver and child interactions, and also data included program level information such as organizational structures, staffing, and service delivery. Right. So from the Baby Faces dataset, we used survey data that were collected from both caregivers and also early Head Start staff members, including home visitors and teachers in the center-based programs. So specifically, caregiver surveys captured information such as how organized a home environment was, as well as parents' perceived closeness with their children, also perceived level of connectedness with family, peers, broader community. So things like getting social support from external systems, as well as parenting efficacy and caregivers' perceived mental health. And staff surveys provided insights into program climate, staff well-being, organizational functioning, as well as parent-staff working alliance. For our outcomes, we focused on infants and toddlers' social emotional functioning. More specifically, we looked at kids' empathy, prosocial behaviors, as well as behavior problems. And importantly, for outcomes data, we used both parent reports and staff reports. And to better understand how these family strengths as well as program level strengths may cluster within home-based samples as well as center-based samples. We used a statistical approach that is called latent profile analysis. So for today's presentation, we will have the results from four distinct but interrelated studies. So we'll have two family strength studies, one focusing on home visiting and one focusing on center-based sample. And similarly, we'll have two studies on program strengths, one for home-based, home visiting, and the other one for center-based sample. All right, jumping right into our results, the interesting and most exciting part. So I will hand it over to Yu Jung, who'll be talking a little bit about family strengths findings with the home visiting sample.
Thank you, Susan. So yeah, as Susan mentioned, among the four studies Susan presented, we first present results from the two related studies, focusing on identifying patterns of family strength, not program strength, but they examine different early Head Start program contexts. So I will be introducing the first one, which is going to be focused on families who participated in the early Head Start home visiting program. Before we start, we share what we found in the data. We would love to hear your perspectives. So when you think about families engaging in early Head Start, what strength do you believe they already bring into that space? Again, please use Slido to share your experiences with us. Knowledge, I agree. I see a lot of knowledge coming in, resiliency, culture, willingness, passion, expert on their child, love, cooperation, culture. Yeah, so what's really interesting is that what you all are sharing here does align with what we see in the data. But our study findings also show that these strengths don't exist in isolation, meaning that one strength being present for all families. Instead, families do tend to show distinct patterns or profiles of strength, combining different resources across relationships, well-being, and also program engagement in different ways. So that's what we'll walk through next. So jumping right into our first study that examined family strength for families who participated in the home visiting programming. So we did find here that there were unique clusters or subgroups within families who were participating in the home visiting program. So here you can see the three different groups. Each line represents a group of families, and the points, each of the points show how likely families in that group were to report different types of strength on the bottom part of this graph. So you can see things like parental mental well-being, parenting efficacy, social support, parent-child interaction, and etc. So the first and largest group, which was about 60% of the families, which is in the turquoise on the very top, was the group we named multidimensional strength and high involvement group. And as you can see, families of this group showed strength across multiple areas, such as reporting strong parent-child relationships, having supportive social networks, and also showing frequent participation in the early Head Start activities. The second group here, which was about 28% of families, was the orange color, and we named this group Parent-Child Relational Struggles Group. Caregivers in this group showed average levels of mental well-being, but reported more challenges in their relationship with their children. But interestingly, these families were fairly engaged with early Head Start programs, especially compared to the pink group, which I will explain next. The last group, which was about 13% of families, was the pink color here, and we named this group Low Mental Well-Being and Limited Social Support Group. This group included caregivers who were experiencing high levels of emotional stress and those who had limited social support. These families showed low involvement with early Head Start activities, but interestingly, their relationship with their children were generally moderate, especially when compared to the orange group. So what do these mean? Overall, these findings does show us that families in early Head Start home visiting have different combinations of strength and also needs. And understanding these patterns is very important because it can help programs tailor support to better meet families' needs, which are often diverse and complex, as we can see here. Um, Okay, so now that we have identified the three groups of families, we also looked at how these different groups relate to children's social emotional well-being. It can be a little bit confusing, so I'll kind of walk through how to read this visual, but we do focus on two main types of outcomes, like Susan explained before, children's social emotional competence and also behavior problems. And we do look at both of these from two perspectives, caregiver reports and staff reports. So along the bottom part, you'll see the different outcomes we just talked about, and along the side, the y-axis shows the average level of each outcome. So higher bars mean higher levels of that outcome. And for each outcome, you'll see a set of three bars. Each bar represents one of the three family groups we identified earlier. So this is where we are directly comparing how children are doing across those different family strength patterns. So I'll provide a very high level summary. First of all, children in the turquoise group, the multidimensional strength high involvement group, showed the most positive outcomes. And children in this group had higher social emotional skills and also reported fewer behavioral concerns. And second, children in the pink group, which was the low mental well-being and limited support group, tended to have less favorable outcomes according to staff, including more behavior concerns and lower social emotional skills. But interestingly, caregivers often rated their children more positively than staff, which may possibly be due to higher levels of parent-child relationships compared to the orange group, even when families were facing stress. And lastly, the orange group, which was the parent-child relational struggles group, fell somewhat in the middle. So children in this group generally showed less favorable outcomes than the turquoise group, but better outcomes than the pink group, particularly in staff reports of behavioral concerns. And one reason why this may be is the somewhat better early Head Start activity involvement level compared to the pink group, which we thought may have been a potential factor that could have affected staff perceptions toward child behavior problems. So to summarize our key takeaways from this first study, first, families in the EHS home visiting bring different combinations of strength and needs. And those differences matter because these patterns are linked differently to children's social emotional development, which suggests that we need to move away from one size fits all approach and instead tailor supports to each family's strength and needs. And second, as we saw, children in the multi-dimensional strength and high involvement group, the turquoise group, showed the most favorable outcomes, child outcomes. And one of the encouraging takeaway from this study was that the majority of the families fell into this group, which suggests that even among families who face economic challenges, many families do demonstrate multiple sources of resiliency and support. Third, our findings show the importance of parent-child relationships. Families in the parent-child relational struggle group, which was the orange group, showed less favorable outcomes compared to the multidimensional strength group. And this does speak to the need for home visitors to have the necessary tools and also training to recognize these challenges and support parent-child interactions using practical, evidence-based strategies in the home setting. And last but not least, families in the low mental well-being and limited social support group, which was the pink group, had children with the highest levels of behavioral concerns according to staff. So this findings does highlight how important parent mental health and social support are for children's social and emotional development, and thus points to the need to better integrate mental health screening and support for parents with an early Head Start. And thank you. I'll pass it on to Susan to introduce our next second study findings.
Thank you, Jung. All right, so now we're going to focus on center-based programs, right? Again, looking at family strengths, but this time instead of home visiting programs, we're going to focus on center-based programs. So from the center-based early Head Start participants, similarly, we identify three different groups. So the first group, the gray group, which we named multidimensional strengths. So this group, about 63% of our participants were classified into this group. This group showed really high scores across all dimensions, including mental well-being, parenting efficacy, orderly home environment, parent social support, positive parent-child interactions, parent-child closeness, as well as parent-reported involvement in early Head Start related activities and events. And the next group, about 28% of our participants were in this group, the purple pinkish group, which we named engaged with strained relationships. For participants in this group, they showed lower than average scores across parenting related items. So they showed some struggles in terms of parenting related items and also parent child relationships, including parent child closeness or parent child interactions. However, they did show and reported about moderate levels of engagement in early Head Start activities. And finally, the smallest group is the low mental well-being group, and about 9% of our participants were in this group. And this group was most notably characterized by parents reporting high levels of depressive symptoms and lower levels of mental well-being. All right, so when we looked at how these different groups were related to children's social emotional functioning, we identified some interesting relationships there. So we'll start with parent reports. So looking at the left sides of this figure, starting with parent reported competency, we found that children in the multidimensional strengths group showed significantly higher levels of social competency compared to children in the other two groups. And for parent-reported behavior problems among these children, we noticed that children in the low parent mental well-being group showed significantly higher levels of behavior problems compared to children in the other groups. Moving on to staff reported outcomes. For staff reported competency, we did not see any significant differences in staff reported competency of these children across these three groups. But for staff reported behavior problems, we found that children in the multidimensional strengths group showed significantly lower levels of behavior problems reported by early Head Start center-based staff members. All right, so summarizing all these findings, because I know it can be a lot, and I think it would be helpful to keep in mind that across home-based, home visiting programs and center-based programs, there were a lot of similarities in terms of our findings. So for our findings, including the three groups that we identified, and both for home visiting and center-based, our findings revealed that both strengths and challenges do exist among families participating in early Head Start programs. But one really promising finding is that for both home visiting and center-based programs, we found that over 60% of these families were classified into the multi-dimensional, multi-strengths groups, where they showed really high levels of protective factors and strengths across all these different domains that we looked at, such as parent mental well-being, parenting efficacy, social support, parent-child relationships, as well as their engagement in early Head Start events and activities. And these findings collectively show unique strengths and resilience that are common and present among this population, despite the fact that a lot of early Head Start participating families often face multiple structural and systemic challenges, such as economic hardship. And also, again, both across home visiting and center-based programs, one of our main findings is that parents' mental health and mental well-being matters. So parents who had lower levels of mental well-being rated their children's behavior problems significantly higher. So our findings indicate that there is that interconnection between parent mental well-being and child adjustment or children's social-emotional functioning, really suggesting that addressing parents' mental health may be an important pathway for preventing or reducing behavior problems among children in early Head Start programs. And finally, our findings collectively suggest that strengths-based family context is really important, and it predicts better child outcomes and functioning. Therefore, early Head Start programs and professionals such as teachers, staff, home visitors, practitioners, and policymakers should really strive to strengthen families' protective factors and resources across multiple areas to promote the well-being of children in early Head Start programs. So with that, I will hand it over to Sarah, who will start us sharing some findings on program strengths.
Thanks so much, Susan. And it's just so exciting to me. I just want to draw the connection. I could hear many of you are already using this strengths-based approach and the things that you're sharing with us. So I'm hoping this is speaking to a lot of the great work that you're already doing. So I want to thank you, Jung and Susan, for walking us through those different groups or clusters that we found with regarding family strengths. So I'm going to transition us now to thinking about these clusters of strengths within the programs themselves, so within that home visiting or center-based programs. And just as a reminder, we looked at a lot of different assets, things like general program climate reported by the teachers or the home visitors, their relationships with children and with children's families, the overall observed program quality within those contexts. And we're going to look at, did we find different groups? And then again, how are these different groups associated with children's social emotional functioning reported by both parents and the staff within those early Head Start programs? But we will, oh, yes, before we do that, I wanted to invite us to make another word cloud because the last one we did was so amazing. So similar to when we asked you to think about the strengths that families bring to their support and work with young children, I'm curious to know about what are the strengths that you think early Head Start programs bring to their support of children and families. So when you think about what in the context of, oh, I love resources and safety, thank you. But what in the context within home visiting or center-based are programs doing that really creates that strong environment to support social emotional development? I love, oh, safety's really, really standing out. Thank you. I like belonging, support, assessments. Thank you. Relationships is standing out. Family engagement is standing out. Routines, connections. Thank you. I think I will try to draw some connections once again to what you're sharing here and what we found within our research as well. So thank you. I love it. We'll definitely come back to this idea of relationships and connections. So I'm first going to look just at the home visiting programs. We found 5 unique clusters or groups of strengths. Before I walk through these distinct clusters on the home visiting side, I want to first acknowledge that the clusters were actually similar in their observed program quality, which shows that overall, early Head Start home visiting, again, this is a nationally representative sample, right? It's really meeting part of its mission to provide that high quality programming during its home visits with children and families. Okay, now let's dive into those clusters. Notice that our most well-represented group, once again, this is a pattern you'll see over and over. So this group at nearly 30% was group 1, what we called our multiple strengths group. These are programs in which program leaders and home visitors reported strong program climate, strong organizational functioning within the home visiting kind of environment across home visitors, low workplace stress, and strong working relationships with children's families. The next group, group 2, which we labeled our program climate strengths group, represented nearly a quarter of those early Head Start programs. They were similar to our multiple strengths group in that they had high program climate, strong organizational functioning, and low workplace stress, but this group reported moderately low working alliances with parents. Our next largest cluster, group 3, which we labeled our strengths with families, represented nearly 22% of programs. It really showed this opposite pattern. Here, home visitors were reporting they had strong working alliances with parents, but they had below average work climate, so lower program climate, organizational functioning, and more workplace stress. Our group 4 is what we called our manageable work climate, representing about 13% of programs. These were programs where home visitors or program leaders reported just sort of average levels of program climate. It's okay, average communication and cohesion within the program. But this group actually reported the lowest quality relationships with parents. And then finally, our smallest cluster, group 5, representing about 11% of programs, was our most at-risk or vulnerable group of programs, and we labeled this our struggling in support and relations group. This had the highest workplace stress and lowest levels of positive workplace climate and organizational functioning, and also lower quality alliances with parents. Not as low as group 4, but still not high quality. So how does this connect to infants and toddlers' social emotional functioning? In general, we only found a few associations here. So first, we found that parents in group 4, that manageable work climate group, those parents reported more behavior problems when compared to group 3, that strengths with families group. So this may mean the quality of that alliance that the home visitor forms with families has implications for how parents view or understand their children's behavior, or that the quality of this alliance is particularly important for decreasing young children's problem behaviors, things like aggression, anxiety, and overactivity. When we turn our attention to what staff reported, I'm going to focus on social emotional competence. Compared to group 5, so our most vulnerable, that struggling in support and relations group, the home visitors in groups 1 and 3, our multiple strengths or our strengths with families groups, reported higher child social emotional competence. This pattern may indicate that the working relationships that home visitors form with families are particularly important for supporting infants and toddlers' social emotional skills, those positive aspects we want them to have. As having an adequate or strong program climate without the alliances with parents, so those groups 2 and 4, didn't demonstrate this pattern. Notably, staff reported problem behaviors wasn't associated with any of these groups, these clusters. So what does this mean? I'll try to unpack that a little bit. So I just want to highlight first, and we might sound like a broken record here, but I want to highlight that over 75% of the early Head Start home visiting programs were part of a group, part of a cluster with some key strengths, either connecting with families and fostering high quality kind of workplace climate in general, or in both these areas. So I think that just highlights all the great work that is already happening in early Head Start. Our findings also indicate that having that strong, high-quality working alliance between parents and those home visitors is likely a key lever for supporting positive social emotional development for these infants and toddlers. It's actually really interesting in our work. The parents' perception didn't seem to matter. There actually wasn't much difference on the parent side with how they tended to, in general, say that their working alliances were going fine. It's really that home visitors' perception that seems to matter. So what can we do to best support those home visitors? Making sure that they have high quality professional development that really targets this area of their practice so that they have the knowledge and skills to build those strength-based collaborative partnerships with families. In addition, I want to acknowledge that we know that working with families can sometimes be challenging and bring up lots of emotions and feelings. So making sure that those home visitors have opportunities to engage in reflective supervision, so working with a leader in their program or peers within their program to kind of have that moment to pause, reflect, process, and problem solve when they're facing challenges in coordinating with families. Lastly, connected to this, I'll share that program climate or organizational functioning, things like clear communication across home visitors or collaboration in that workplace environment and having low stress, may be particularly meaningful when home visitors are struggling more to form those quality alliances with families. Notice that group 5, that struggling in support and relations group we identified, may represent home visiting staff who are struggling to build those great working relationships with parents in the context of a more negative work environment. Now I'm going to pass the mic off to Erin, who's going to walk through our last set of findings.
Thank you, Sarah. All right, so for our final set of results, we are digging deeply into clusters of strengths among center-based early Head Start programs. So Susan and Yu Jung shared about families, Sarah shared about program strengths among home visiting, and I get the program strengths among center-based. So again, like Sarah shared, to identify these clusters, we really broadly looked at these 2 primary sets of indicators, both items that represented relationships, like teachers' relationships with children and families, both as reported by the teacher and as reported by the parent, and items representing the EHS center climate and functioning as reported by teachers and program directors. So for centers, when we combined these groups of indicators all together, we found that they tended to cluster in 4 different ways. The first 2 clusters on the left made up a collective 75% of the sample, and they shared this common characteristic of positive relationships between teachers and families as rated by both teachers and parents. Teachers felt positively about how they got along with the parents and had a high degree of closeness with the children in their care, and parents similarly felt positively about their relationships with their child's teacher. So cluster 1, which was more than half of the center-based sample, also had positive ratings across all the items measuring their working environments. So children within this cluster were attending early Head Start programs where their teachers got along well with them and their families, but they also had teachers who were feeling well supported by their colleagues and low levels of workplace stress and tension. Cluster 2, in contrast, which was about 20% of the sample, had similarly positive ratings for teacher and family relationships. They're getting along well with the children and families with whom they're working, but the care was occurring within the context of a challenging workplace or more challenging workplace conditions. Teachers reported more workplace stress, a lower sense of collaboration and cohesion than did teachers in the other cluster. So when we move on then to our final 2 clusters, our remaining ones, clusters 3 and 4, they didn't have that same generally positive relationship that characterized clusters 1 and 2. So cluster 3 was characterized by both relational and environmental struggles. Teachers serving kids in this cluster reported having the lowest average relationship with children and families than any other cluster. And they also identified that they were working in settings with below average program functioning and climate. Importantly for this cluster, though, is that while teacher-reported relationship scores were relatively low, that same difference wasn't seen for the parent-reported relationships. So parents of children in this cluster felt just as positively about their relationships with their children's teachers as did parents in the positive relationships cluster. Only the teacher-reported relationships differed, which we'll come back to in a moment. And then finally, our 4th and final and smallest cluster also included children where there were strained relationships, but this time those strained relationships were reported by parents, but not by teachers. So children within this cluster were being cared for in settings where teachers generally felt pretty positively about both their relationships and their working environments, but where parents felt negatively about their relationships with their teachers. When we then add children's outcomes to the mix, we find a few patterns of relationships between our clusters and how well children are doing socio-emotionally. So first, we didn't see any differences between the first 2 clusters. So there were no differences in either parent or teacher reported competence or behavioral challenges for children who were served in EHS settings with high positive relationships but lower quality environments, as well as high positive relationships and high positive working environments. So children in both of those first 2 clusters were doing similarly well across the board. When we come back to that 3rd cluster, though, where teachers identified both relational and environmental challenges, we find that children in this cluster were rated by both parents and teachers as having lower social competence overall and a higher level of behavior problems than children in those two more positive clusters, which is a particularly interesting finding that raises some questions for me about how teachers' experiences and interactions within the classroom may then carry through and show up in children with outside of the classroom or center, because families are also noticing these challenges and concerns. Moving to the fourth cluster, we have that children in the fourth cluster where parents rated their relationships negatively, they also showed differences from the first two clusters, those more positive ones. But these differences were limited only to parents' ratings of children's behavioral problems. So children in this cluster showed similarly high levels of parent-reported behavior problems as the third cluster, and that amount is higher than the children for the two positive relationship clusters. But notably, there were no differences in teacher reports of any behavioral challenges or competence for children within that final cluster there. So kind of to wrap it all up and get you to a space where we can kind of dig into your questions and thoughts and other ideas you might have, I wanted to share just a brief key takeaways from my perspective about what stands out to me and what I'd like you all to walk away from this part of the findings with. So first, most kids attending center-based EHS programs, and as all of my co-presenters shared, either home visiting or attending home visiting or center-based EHS programs are served by programs where there are strong relationships. They're generally doing well overall. So the majority of kids receiving EHS services are receiving high quality services and really doing pretty well. Second, though, is that we really find that relationships matter for children. And we can see this in these particular findings when we look at clusters 1 and 2, which shared that characteristic of strong relationships and also the most positive child social emotional outcomes, even in the context of a more challenging workplace environment. When relationships weren't rated positively, children also had poorer outcome scores. Importantly, though, we also see in the findings that parents and teachers' perceptions of the strength of the relationship don't always agree. And there are differences that are associated with children's outcomes. So this particular finding of a low parent-reported relationship, for example, being associated with high parent-reported behavioral problems, to me, really speaks to the value of capturing multiple perspectives when we're seeking to find out what kids and families may need or where they have different strengths. Because if we only rely on teacher reports, for example, for children in this fourth cluster, we run the risk of missing potentially important needs that a family might otherwise be trying to identify. And then lastly, our findings seem to show that some teachers are able to build strong relationships with families and children, even in more challenging workplace contexts. But not all teachers appear able to do so. When teachers were working within positive climates, they reported more positive relationships with families, but some teachers were working in more negative climates also reported struggling with relationships. So given these findings, it seems that a positive working environment may not be a necessary condition for strong relationships, but it very likely is a supportive one. So therefore, if we want to help EHS teachers be able to build strong positive relationships with families, we need to consider what it might take to shift a program's culture and climate to one that is more collaborative or cohesive or community-oriented first, so that then EHS providers would be able to extend those positive feelings toward their families. All right. So now that we have probably completely overwhelmed you with information and given you 4 different quick summaries of very complicated things, we wanted to just give you a moment to share in the Slido one finding or key takeaway that surprised you or otherwise stood out in a particular way. And as you respond to the Slido question, I'd also like to invite you to share any other questions you might have in the Q&A section of Zoom, and we will be able to get started answering some of your lingering questions. I can tell you all are thinking very deeply about what stood out to you from our work.
Thanks, Erin. I was going to say, Susan, do you want to start responding to some of the questions that are coming up in the QA? And I'll leave this slide up so folks' other thoughts can run in.
That sounds good. Yes. Thank you again, everybody, for listening to our presentation. We understand it was a lot of information. And thank you also for submitting your questions through the Q&A box. We have a question through the Q&A box. So the question is, do you have any suggestions on how to better support in the work environment for the workers? Was there anything that stood out when it came to the teachers and home visitors not feeling supported? I think this kind of pertains to Sarah and Erin's portion of the presentation, so I'll hand it to you guys.
And I'll take a quick stab first, Sarah, if that's okay, and then you can fill in with any other details. So really, the big spaces that we looked at the work environment in terms of quality for staff were in cohesion. So how connected do people feel together? Like, are they working toward the same goal in the same way? In terms of communication, do they feel that they're able to connect and get answers for things that they need, get the information that they need in different ways, and then collaboration. Do they have ways to work together, which particularly I think in home visiting settings can be really challenging, as we know, because people are working independently out and about in the community quite often. But the cohesion, collaboration, and communication really are the spaces where I think the biggest wins come in. And then there's more about kind of that idea of stress and decreasing stress, but there's not a lot of strong evidence about like which you should do first, decreasing stress or increasing the positives, and they seem to really move together hand in hand. And so, Sarah, I'm curious if you have other thoughts.
I'll say, Erin, I think you answered that beautifully. And I'll just share at the end here, I'll highlight a couple just publicly available resources that might target some of these areas about increasing communication and collaboration in programs. So if you're like, what are some quick tools that I might leverage to do that? I'll highlight some places you can go if that speaks to something you want to think about within your own setting.
Wonderful. And for the purpose of time, I think we can move or proceed to the next section. But if anybody has any additional questions, please feel free to continue to submit through the Q&A box, and we'll get to it later. But Sarah?
Thanks so much, Susan. So I will try not to be too much of a broken record, but here are some things that I hope that you're walking away from. As all of us have emphasized, there's a lot of strengths happening in early Head Start. And also that we see, so that was the most well-represented group in all of our separate studies, our separate but interconnected studies. But also there's heterogeneity, that different groups exist across the families and the programs. So I hope that's a key thing that you're walking away with. Also, to echo what you were writing within those word clouds, relationships are really important, right? So we saw that stand out again and again as a kind of a key connector to children's social emotional development, well aligned with what we know about developmentally appropriate practice, right? So we know that families differ in the types and combinations of strengths that they bring. And recognizing and building off these strengths might be particularly important. I want to highlight that, families that might be engaging with early Head Start, like they're part of those activities, as we saw in some of the profiles, but they had lower quality interactions with their child. If we can think about ways to leverage that involvement in early Head Start to kind of strengthen what's happening in those parent-child interactions, that might be one way of leveraging that strengths-based framework. And then again, really paying attention to when families might have lower mental well-being, be struggling with depression, as we know that was seen to be really connected to children's social emotional outcomes. I'll also just highlight in terms of those program strengths, as Erin was saying, really thinking about how do we enhance that positive work climate, that might set the conditions to really have those supportive connections with both children and families. It might not be necessary for all the professionals that are working within early Head Start and home visiting or center-based, as obviously some folks were still able to form those rich connections with families, even when they felt they didn't have as supportive a work climate. But for those ones that are perhaps needing some more support in their connection with families, having that high quality work environment is really, really crucial. So really taking that strengths-based approach is important. So as we're thinking about that strengths-based approach and really ultimately promoting resilience and positive developmental outcomes in young children, I just wanted to quickly highlight some freely available professional development supports that connect to some of the main themes that we presented in our findings today. So all of what I highlighted on the slide are publicly available courses on the Virtual Lab School, or the VLS, which is an online professional development system for child and youth programs. But if you want some more supports on connecting with families, we have whole courses on family engagement. And in there, you'll find tools on learning more from families about their expert of their own child, right? What do they know and want to bring to that partnership? And even some guides for how you might approach challenging conversations. There's also a lot of supports on there in creating a strong working environment. So I just wanted to highlight that. As we're wrapping up, here are references for our work today. I'm going to pass it back to Susan one last time.
Right, thank you so much. We just want to acknowledge those who supported our work. So this work that we presented today was supported by and funded by the Department of Health and Human Services and Administration for Children and Families. We also want to thank the Crane Center for creating this space for this webinar. Also Sherry Sutton, Head Start Director at Joan Baum Family Center, and also Julie Stone, Executive Director of the Ohio Start Association, for their support. And also, last but not least, everybody who participated and attended this webinar today. Thank you so much, everyone, for your attendance today.